Welcome back, 365 Sports. Our good friend Taylor McHargue joins us now, former Rice quarterback and current broadcaster who – did you do 3 games in a week last year? Did you get a trifecta?
We did. We got a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday last year. We did have that stretch. Tried to pull off a Friday, Saturday, and had the flight get canceled Saturday morning. So I don't think I'll try that again.
Oh, well, that's Taylor's Swift hours that you're working there. So
not quite the same pay. I'll switch contract to Taylor Swift.
I'm sure you would. Taylor, as a former player, and you've seen all these things going on, back pay. Unfortunately for you, that doesn't apply to you because it's past the statute of limitations. But back pay, revenue sharing, all of this, from your perspective as a player, do you like this? Do you think it needs to be morphed? What are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I've always been in support of some sort of compensation that goes beyond a player's scholarship, and that's across all sports. So we've talked about this on your show, even with Olympic athletes that go compete at the highest level in the Olympics, and they deserve the endorsement dollars that come with that. And that is what it felt like athletes were missing out when I was playing. My last year was 2013. So outside of that statute of limitations, it was illegal for a booster to buy us dinner. Where now, look, I mean, it is the Wild West in terms of recruiting, and all of these coaches, even in baseball, you heard the head coach, I believe it was for Coastal Carolina, talking about how NIL has just, in his mind, ruined college sports. And I think it's turned a lot of fans off because it really has turned into just the highest bidder. And coaches will tell you one of the first questions that sometimes these kids are asking, if not the first question, is, well, how much are you guys able to offer me? What are you going to pay me outside of my scholarship in the way of NIL and the collective that you have at your school, even for kids out of high school, much less transfers. And I think, this is a byproduct of the NCAA kind of having their head buried in the sand for a very long time. And there was no real succession plan put in place for, whenever ultimately these kids were able to make money beyond their scholarship. This is the other side of it. There's really no guardrails or rules in place right now.
So when you were how much was this talked about when you were playing amongst players?
Not really at all, because at the time we were trying to fight to get, we wanted bigger checks for our off-campus stipend. We were not, it wasn't really, and again, I played at Rice, right? So even in this NIL world that we live in, Rice is, there are a few guys on that team that I know have, like a JT Daniels when he came in. I know there was a contract in place for him. But it's not one of those schools where you've got, everybody on the roster is getting paid something, at least not that I'm aware of. But it wasn't something that we were, wasn't top of mind, certainly then. I think now, though, the difference is there's a expectation with any kid that's playing Division I that they are asking for some sort of compensation. Now, obviously, at the highest level, at the Texas and the Floridas and the Notre Dames of the world, A&M, that's part of recruiting now, is having that budget in place and going to your boosters, throughout the year, saying we've got to fundraise for this because it just never stops. But, when I was playing, this was, again, we were just trying to get more money for our stipend checks.
Yeah, and that was kind of the big, the first benchmark to cross was, more for the stipend check, more actually getting enough meals for the day. When you're a high-end college athlete and you have to consume, 3,000 calories, especially during workouts, and they're giving you enough for about 700 calories. Those were the gaps they had to close. But always been interesting to me, the talk of it over the years and what it was. And now it is this free-for-all that's changed things. But have you seen, at least in this last portal cycle, it appears that while there's still a ton of movement and people leaving, but roster retention does appear to be better, and it feels like schools and collectives have at least the first part of this maybe figured out so that we don't have guys going all over the place all the time.
Yeah, I think that's certainly part of it. I think you've seen, it depends on, in some of these schools, when they put out, and I'll use Rice again as an example, the majority of their production coming back this year. But a lot of that retention is based on what are you able to play or pay your existing players. And what's also interesting that I don't think people realize is you see these kids that they transfer in. How often are teams able to fundraise for that player again? And what are the expectations of that player if maybe they didn't meet the expectations, right? If you bring somebody in that's supposed to produce at X amount or X level and they're not able to, that school's not going to offer up the exact same contract the next season. And I think that's where we go back to having guardrails in place. In any sort of contract, take professional sports, for example, these guys oftentimes are in multi-year deals, 3 or 4 year contracts where they're guaranteed a base amount. And if they walk away from it, then they're not owed that anymore. I think that's really what we're trying to get to in college. And I think in a revenue share format makes it a little bit easier to accomplish that. But there's still so many things we've got to cross and rules that we've got to sort out. And with the group of 5 and Power 5, or I guess it's Power 4 now, but roster retention goes beyond just what are you able to pay your existing players. You're balancing who you're bringing in, and then also how much you're able to pay your high school recruits as well.
So, Taylor, let's talk some actual football now, because so much of the offseason is, legal battles and conference realignment and what's going on in court and these kind of ridiculous things, which is not why we do what we do. And most of us aren't even qualified to talk about it anyway, because we didn't go to law school. But when you look ahead to next season, and we did a segment about the national championship odds, there are teams like Michigan and Washington who both lost a lot of players. Now, Washington also, and they both lost coaches, and it might be an easier transition at Michigan. But as far as teams that you see on the rise and maybe on the fall, like at least on a dip temporarily while they get their new coaching staff settled, how do you see the top teams shaking out so far in this offseason?
Yeah, you mentioned Michigan. I mean, that's one that I'm very curious to see how do they respond. There is still a ton of talent left on that roster, but my goodness, I mean, look at the NFL draft, how many guys they are or that are not going to be in Ann Arbor this year. And, oh, by the way, you've got a new staff as well. So that's one obviously paying attention to. You mentioned the odds. Ohio State coming into the season, second best odds for a national championship. Curious to see how Texas does as well. I think last year, even Longhorn fans will admit, maybe a little bit ahead of schedule getting to the college football playoff and had a chance to beat Washington late and actually get into the national championship against Georgia. And so I think they may have been a year ahead of schedule, and now so much of that production back this season, very active again in the portal, and their roster top down. I mean, it's as good a roster as you've seen for Texas, in my opinion, since that 2009 national championship team that lost to Alabama. So curious to see how they perform, especially early in the season. They have that test at Michigan, and then that schedule. I mean, you talk about a step up moving over to the SEC. They're playing Michigan, Georgia, A&M, and Oklahoma all on the same schedule. And your down weeks in conference, you're talking about Florida, Mississippi State. I mean, this is going to be a really challenging schedule right from the jump for the Longhorns.
You mentioned Florida just a second ago. They have the hardest schedule that's ever been created by man. Like it's insane. They have one game on their schedule that you can say they'll definitely win that one, and the rest of them, even the ones they'll be favored in, is still like, man, this is dicey. I doubt they'll have a double-digit spread outside their FCS opponent all year long, even when they're favored. If you're the Florida powers that be, and Billy Napier already hasn't delivered the results that you want, but do you take into account that even Tennessee, who's better than that, or Georgia would hate this schedule. Everyone else in the league would hate the schedule that they were dealt.
The schedule's brutal. I think you're really looking, if you're part of the administration for Florida, you're looking to see how do they perform even in a loss, right? If it's on the road and you're playing close, anybody that's reasonable will be able to look up and see, okay, even if we had Nick Saban, we're probably not competing for a national championship this year. I think the biggest thing, though, is some of the off-the-field stuff, how they handled, getting sued right now. I think that's the stuff that if you're a booster and the results aren't there on the field, oh, by the way, we're also getting dragged in the mud off the field as well with headlines that you don't need in your program. I think that's the stuff that it wears on people. And if it's another down year, that's where you use that as an excuse, even with this brutal schedule, to make a change.
If you look at the Big 12, it's hard to pick a favorite right now. It's hard to pick a team that you know for sure will be. I know there's some teams like Cincinnati or Arizona State that we didn't see a lot from last year and that we don't know, but it's hard to see a team that's going to be a true bottom dweller. Do you think that will be the most competitive league in the country this year, top to bottom?
I think it's going to be incredibly competitive. I also think it's going to be incredibly entertaining. And I know losing Texas and Oklahoma, you lose some of that firepower, certainly. And I do think you lose, the potential for the big upsets. Anytime somebody would come in, take a Kansas a few years ago, even when Texas wasn't great, those games are always highly entertaining if there's an upset between those two teams. But man, with the schools that you have now, and when you factor in that you're now grabbing some of that West Coast time zone as well with Arizona and Arizona State, Mountain Time, West Coast time, you're going to get some of those late kickoffs in conference play. I think this has all the makings to be a really competitive and fun conference. These schools play a fun brand of football. And I thought it was interesting when you looked at odds that you had Kansas sitting there with the third best odds in the Big 12, Kansas State, Utah, and then Kansas. But I think this is going to be a league that you've got teams, all the way down to Cincinnati and Arizona State that I think could pop up and bite anybody in the league. I think it's going to be really competitive and a lot of fun to watch.
It hasn't been this way since 2008 or whatever it was when Todd Reesing was there. But if Jalen Daniels is healthy, I don't know many teams that are going to be able to beat Kansas. And even though they're not going to play one single true home game this year because of the stadium renovations, that's a team that could find its way into the playoff to me pretty easily given the health of Jalen Daniels, who I think most teams in the country, save for 3 or 4, would trade a healthy Jalen Daniels for the quarterback that they have.
I think I totally agree. I think it's a really difficult brand of football to prepare against on the defensive side. And when you have somebody that's that dynamic at the quarterback spot, it doesn't matter the league. I mean, that's a difference maker. It really just comes down to his health. And what I'm also curious to see in the Big 12 is this a 2-team bid for the playoffs out of the 12-team league, or is this because it also, as competitive as we've talked about, I think this also has the potential to be a league that kind of gobbles itself up, and you end up with a champion that may have 3 losses on the schedule by the end of the season. I think that's certainly possible here. And if that's the case, I think it's going to be really hard to sneak 2 teams in there. Now, if you get some separation, it's possible to get, one that has a 1 loss, maybe the second place has 2 losses and you get 2 in. But that's also something in this first year of the expanded playoff when it gets down to the wire. We've just replaced the drama of a 14 bid. We're trying to get that 5th team, who's going to be the 5th team that's left out. Well, now it's who's the 13th team. And that's going to be all the drama around, is that a second place or third place Big 12 team versus is that a 4th place or a 5th place SEC team?
What do you think about Colorado, Shadir Sanders, one of the better quarterbacks in the country, going to be a very highly, sought after in the draft more than likely. But the fact that roster has turned over again, and maybe it's better than it was a year ago, but right now that's just so hard to tell, and it's so hard to build chemistry. Even when you have a really good roster that's been together for a while, sometimes that's tough to do.
Colorado, I think, like everybody else, I'm just in a wait and see mode because last season you had the whiplash of such a surprise, their success early. And then I think everybody that really followed the sport knew that at some point this was going to catch up with them, that they had outperformed expectations early. They had also taken advantage of some of the weaker teams on their schedule early, and then it caught up with them. And what Dion and his staff are trying to do is different than basically everyone else in the country. They go out and have proven in back-to-back years they have no problem revamping any position that they feel like they need to, and really going with the true free agent hired gun model. And is that sustainable? I think a lot of people would say no, it's not. I think you'll have more success than they did last year. But again, I think the expectations for some people got so out of whack early on where it became, is this going to be a playoff team? When their roster, from a power ranking standpoint, was in the bottom half of the country. So I think tempering expectations, let's just get Colorado to a bowl game first and then go from there.
Taylor, what you've done a lot of G5. You do a lot of G5 games. What is the G5 team that you think people are sleeping on this year?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. I'm excited to see what does the Mountain West look like this season. Boise State is a team that we've come to know them in years past as somebody that really knocking on the door of some of the big time bowl games and New Year's Day, New Year's Six bowl games. That's a team to me that they rallied late in the year last year, ended up putting together a solid back half of the schedule, and that's a team that depending on what their roster looks like, the Mountain West, the champion of the Mountain West, tends to be in a really good position. I'm also looking to see how does Tulane bounce back. They had this incredible year last year, but they lose Michael Pratt to the NFL. They lose Coach Fritz to Houston. How do they rebound in the American Conference? But still a lot of good football. And then also interested in my rights outs. They bring in E.J. Warner, Kurt Warner's son, quarterback who transferred in from Temple. And like I mentioned, they've got a ton of production coming back in a league where I think they've got a chance to be really competitive, and their non-conference schedule isn't too daunting either. I think Rice has a chance to have their best record that they've had in a very long time with head coach Mike Fulmer.
I'm really interested to see Tulane. I think John Summerall's a heck of a hire that they made. I don't think that they're going to be like, if they have a dip, it might just be because they need to get a better quarterback or something like that to replace Michael Pratt. But for the hire they could have made, I can't imagine a better fit for coach and program given where they are.
Yeah, I completely agree. And there's still what Coach Fritz had built up there and the pride that they had rolling. I just hope that Tulane is able to sustain that, because I remember going down there and playing where Tulane wasn't very good. They were playing in the Dome, and that program has come such a long way in a fairly short period of time. I just hope that they're able to sustain that. But I agree. I still think that's a top 2 or 3 team this season in the American.
Taylor, do you have big plans for the summer, you and the family?
Man, we got a couple deals. We got a 2-year-old son, so we basically, we're going to be at the pool like every single day, 'cause that's all he wants to do. But no, we're good stuff this summer, and then working through right now what the fall is going to look like, and I'm working through contract stuff right now. So we'll know here pretty soon what that's going to be, and looking forward to another good college football season. Well,
Taylor, always love having you on the show. Thanks for hopping on today, and we'll talk to you again soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Taylor McHargue. A burgeoning young mind in college football, I think.
Yes, good fond.
Look, it was great. I think Jason Minnick's